What if I told you that Hamilton's solid career was much more than a simple comeback? What nobody showed you is that, behind that 5th place, a story of frustration, adaptation and key decisions that reveal the true state of the Ferrari project. Do you dare to see what others silent? Ferrari reached the narrow and challenging streets of the Principality with a carefully planned approach that sought stability and performance under absolute control. Instead of experimenting with new pieces that could fail under pressure, the Italian team opted for known, reliable, but optimized solutions to ensure competitive performance in one of the most implacable paths of the calendar. This strategy was especially evident in the choice to assemble the rear wing of maximum aerodynamic load used in 2024. This piece was not only key in the victory of Leclerc the previous year, but had proven to be exceptionally effective in low-speed areas and closed curves characteristics of Monaco. Repelling this component, rather than a nostalgic decision, was a declaration of principles. Ferrari prioritized precision and trust over risky innovation. In addition to the spoiler, Ferrari implemented crucial modifications in the thermal management of the car, incorporating rear cooling ducts previously tested in Imola. This improvement, although less colorful, was decisive in brake efficiency and the general stability of the car for long batches. In Monaco, where the brakes are among the most demanded elements due to constant acceleration and braking sequences, this update allowed pilots to maintain a more constant pace without compromising the useful life of the tires. This synergy between aerodynamics and refrigeration reflected a more mature Ferrari, which learned from past errors and now executed surgical precision. This technical context was the land where Lewis Hamilton had to rebuild. Despite his 7 world titles, the British was still in the process of adapting to his new red machine. The first major awards of the season had served him to explore the limits of SF-25 and in many ways, to redefine his own driving style. Aware that Monaco is a circuit that does not forgive improvisations, Hamilton understood that the success there is not built only with speed, but with millimeter knowledge of the car, the track and its hidden rhythms. Therefore, Ferrari's approach was also a tactical gift for him. They gave him a known and predictable technical basis on which he could rely to rebuild confidence. Meanwhile, the tension floated in the air. The expectations were high, both within the team and in the media environment. Ferrari had begun the season with ups and downs, and Monaco, due to its symbolic and technical importance, became a kind of fire test. Hamilton knew it. Each turn in free training, each modification in the car's adjustments, each conversation with its engineer had an emotional and strategic load remarkable. The silence concentrated in the garage was not only technical work. It was a pressure choreography contained, of ambition measured and of repressed desire to return to the top. Everything was prepared. Ferrari had brought the best of his proven arsenal, and Hamilton, in his symbiosis process with the machine, approached one of the most complex and revealing weekends of his new stage as a pilot of the Rampante Cavallino. Saturday's day in Monaco was emerging as a golden opportunity for Lewis Hamilton to consolidate all the technical and psychological work accumulated in training. The SF-25 responded solidly, and the British pilot, after a period of adaptation full of ups and downs, finally seemed to have found the melting point with his new car. The initial result of the classification was, at first glance, encouraging. Hamilton was placed 4th, a position that represented not only an obvious improvement with respect to its previous results in 2025, but also a sign that its rhythm on a return began to shine again, even in a layout as technical and narrow as that of the Principality. However, this apparent achievement was quickly overshadowed by an episode that revealed a fissure in Ferrari's organizational structure. In the final minutes of the Q3, when the traffic and the conditions of the circuit returned extremely complex any maneuver, Hamilton rolled slowly in a key zone of the layout. The intention was nothing more than generating space to prepare their launched return, a common practice among the pilots in classification. However, Ferrari did not adequately communicate the minimum time delta required in that sector, something that the regulation strictly stipulates to avoid dangerous congestions on the track. As a result, the commissioners interpreted that the British had reduced excess speed, causing a potential obstruction for the other competitors who came in a fast lap. The penalty was immediate and severe: 3 positions on the starting grid for Sunday. If a 4th place with clear aspirations to the podium, Hamilton was relegated to the 7th place, in a circuit where to advance is little less than a chimera. But beyond numerical punishment, the truly transcendent was the feeling of internal uncoordination. A team like Ferrari, which seeks titles and has invested a significant amount of resources to integrate a pilot like Hamilton, cannot afford such basic communication errors, unless in a scenario where every thousandth in each decision can define the result. This moment marked an emotional breakdown on the weekend. For Hamilton, the penalty was not only frustrating in sports terms, but also personally. He represented a blow to his confidence in the team. The gesture after knowing the sanction, a long and dense silence in the box, reflected not only disappointment, but also a critical evaluation of its environment. 4 years in Mercedes, Lewis had become accustomed to a meticulous system, where decisions were calculated with surgical precision. To meet this type of errors in a team with as much history like Ferrari forced him to emphasize his expectations. The impact was not isolated. Internally, the team was also shaken. The penalty presented vulnerabilities in its decision-making structure, particularly at the time of greatest pressure. Doubts about real-time information management, track traffic management, and wall efficiency began to grow, just when the project needed to show firmness. That classification, which could be a relaunch platform for Ferrari and Hamilton, became a painful reminder that, although technical machinery could be improving, the team's human gears still required to refine. An wasted opportunity, not due to lack of talent, but for a communicative failure. An error that, in a sport of margins as small as Formula One, is paid very expensive. The Sunday morning dawned with a tense and expectant air in the paddock in Monaco. The stands vibrated with the energy of an audience that knows the history of this circuit well. A layout where 80% of the result is defined on Saturday, but where the remaining 20% can be decisive if it is played with surgical precision. Lewis Hamilton, starting from the 7th position after the penalty received the day before, knew that his margin of action was minimal. However, far from assuming a conservative or resigned attitude, the British executed one of the most meticulous, intelligent, and emotionally contained performances of the whole season. From the same moment when the traffic lights went out, Hamilton evidenced a total concentration. His departure was impeccable, without mistakes or sudden movements, taking full advantage of the initial meters without compromising the status of the tires. In Monaco, risk more in the first curve can end in the wall or in a sanction, and he knew. Therefore, his approach was not to advance in the first round, but in placing his car in the best possible position to read the race pace, protect the temperature of the compounds, and study the movements of the platoon. The truly remarkable was his reading of the rhythm. Hamilton knew how to manage each stint with extreme sensitivity. In a circuit where the dirty air punishes the grip in each braking and slow curve, he knew how to stay right at the limit of the ideal distance. Close enough to press, but far enough to avoid prematurely degrade the tires. This subtle dance between rhythm and conservation is one of the specialties of heptacampion, and in Monaco he executed it with mastery. While other pilots fell into the overheating or graining trap, Hamilton maintained an enviable level of consistency after return. Another key point was his interaction with the wall. Ferrari's strategy, this time refined after Saturday mistakes, opted for an early undercut to avoid half-table traffic. The synchronization was perfect. His stop was clean, post-pit traffic was calculated, and the rhythm in departure was enough to win a key position. These types of maneuvers are not improvised. They require total alignment between pilot, engineers, and strategists. And at that time, for the first time on the weekend, Ferrari and Hamilton seemed to operate as an integrated unit. The posterior advance, although discreet on the screen, was one of the most clinical of the weekend. Not for spectacularity, but for opportunity. A minimal error of the pilot that preceded him, a traction slightly higher when leaving the tunnel, and a braking to the limit in the chicane were enough to win another position without the need for excessive risk. It was a clean, precise, and measured movement, which perfectly reflected the philosophy he had adopted for that race. But perhaps the most revealing was not in visible maneuvers, but in his body language throughout the Grand Prix. Hamilton did not argue with the wall, he did not publicly question decisions, he showed no despair. He had assumed the role of silent leader, a figure that builds from solidity and not from the noise. Its fifth final position in the Monégasque context and given the circumstances, was more valuable than many podiums obtained in circuits with multiple overtaking opportunities. Not only because of the numerical result, but because he confirmed that Lewis had found his place in Ferrari, not as an isolated star, but as a functional gear within a machine in consolidation process. The fifth position signed by Lewis Hamilton in Monaco was not a brilliant result at first glance for the standards of a 7-time world champion. There were no spectacular advances on television, or great celebrations when crossing the finish line. But that is precisely what makes his career in the Principality so fascinating. It was a deeply tactical performance, designed from the base of frustration and built with intelligence, patience, and character. It was a demonstration of how a very clear message can be sent to the rest of the grid without the need to get on the podium. Hamilton, without saying a single word, showed that he does not need infinite adaptations or prolonged excuses to begin to make differences with a completely new car. Despite the media pressure, the inevitable comparisons with Leclerc and the weight of carrying the rampant Cavallino on his shoulders, he knew how to carry out a race that, for others, could have ended in resignation or chaos. It transformed an unfair penalty into a silent motivation. He transformed Saturday's strategic uncoordination into a surgical execution on Sunday. And above all, it transformed a scenario that historically punishes the impatient into a personal and professional reaffirmation platform. This result, beyond the added points, has a symbolic importance for the immediate future of Ferrari. On the one hand, it demonstrates that SF-25 can have complicated weekends if it is handled precisely. On the other, it suggests that if Hamilton is able to reach this level of performance in Monaco, the most technical and punitive circuit of the calendar, the competitive roof of the equipment is yet to be defined. This type of career is what distinguishes the great pilots of the good ones. And if Ferrari manages to learn from his mistakes, correct internal communication defects and provide Lewis with a car at the height of its execution capacity, the podium will not only be a possibility, but a logical expectation in the following quotes.